Brendan Holt had not slept past 5 in the morning for 3 years. Not because he set an alarm. Because his body had simply forgotten how. He would lie there in the dark of the small bedroom above the hardware store his family had run for 2 generations, listening to the radiator knock and hiss, counting the things he needed to do before his 8-year-old son. Theo. He checked the list again in his head. No. His son's name was something he had chosen carefully. Danny. Daniel James Holt, named after Brendan's own father, who had died the same spring Brendan's wife left. 2 losses in 4 months. The kind of year that doesn't build character so much as it hollows a person out and leaves them standing. Danny had started 3rd grade that September with shoes that were half a size too small. Because Brendan had not noticed until the boy started limping. That was the moment Brendan understood what exhaustion really meant. Not tired. Not overwhelmed. Just not noticing things you should notice. He ran Holt & Sons Hardware on the main street of Dunmore, a small town 2 hours north of Halifax, Nova Scotia. The sign still said Nan Sons, even though Brendan's older brother Chet had moved to Vancouver years ago and never looked back. Brendan had repainted everything else when he took over. He never repainted the sign. Some things you hold on to even when they stop making sense. The store did well enough in summer. Contractors came in. Cottagers needed things. But by February the shelves held more dust than customers, and Brendan had taken to doing the books at the kitchen table after Danny fell asleep, moving numbers around on a spreadsheet, the way you rearrange deck chairs. Knowing it doesn't help, but needing to do something with your hands. He was not a man who talked about his situation. The people of Dunmore knew what they knew, which was that Brendan Holt had gotten a rough deal, that he handled it quietly, and that his boy was polite and well-dressed, even when Brendan clearly was not sleeping. That was the reputation he had built. He was proud of it the way you can only be proud of something that costs you everything every single day. The woman arrived on a Thursday in late October. Brendan was outside replacing the wood trim above the store's front window, standing on a ladder he had borrowed from Ray Costello next door, when a dark blue sedan with Quebec plates pulled up to the curb. Not unusual. People passed through Dunmore on the way to the Cape, but the car sat there a long time without anyone getting out, and Brendan is not the type to stare, so he kept working. Then the passenger door opened. She was wearing a charcoal coat, the kind with structured shoulders that people in cities wear to mean something. She had her hair pulled back and she was carrying a leather folder, not a purse, which struck Brendan as specific somehow. She looked up at the store, at the sign, at Brendan on the ladder, and then she said his name. Brendan Holt. He came down 2 rungs. That's me. She introduced herself as Claudine Marchand, CEO of Marchand Development, a property and infrastructure firm based in Montreal. She said it the way people say things when they expect the name to land with weight, and Brendan felt vaguely sorry for her that it didn't, because he genuinely had no idea who she was. My grandfather grew up in Dunmore, she said. He passed away last month. In his will he left a letter asking me to come here. She paused. He mentioned your store specifically. He mentioned you. Brendan came down off the ladder entirely. I don't think I ever met your grandfather. He knew your father, she said. He said your father helped him once. A long time ago, when he had nothing. He said, the Holts were the kind of people who deserved better than they usually got. She looked slightly uncomfortable, as though she was reading from a script she hadn't written. He asked me to see if there was anything I could do. Brendan looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his paint scraper and turned back to the trim. That's a kind thing for him to have said, he told her. But I'm not looking for anyone to do anything. She didn't leave. That was the part Brendan hadn't expected. Most people, when you give them a polite door out, they take it. Claudine Marchand stood on the sidewalk in her Montreal coat and said, "Could I at least come inside? It's cold." He said yes because he was raised to say yes to that. Inside the store she looked at things the way people look at things when they're trying to understand a life quickly. The old cash register he kept because it still worked. The wall of keys, the bins of specialty screws sorted by hand. She asked questions that weren't intrusive but were precise. How long had the store been in the family? Whether he'd considered online sales. What the supplier situation looked like since the big box store opened in Truro. He answered honestly, because lying about a hardware store felt ridiculous. Danny came in at 4, the way he always did, dropping his backpack behind the counter and immediately asking if there was anything to eat. Brendan handed him a granola bar from the drawer without looking. It was the same drawer, the same bar, the same time every day. The routine was a kind of love. Danny looked at Claudine with the frank assessment of an 8-year-old. "Are you buying something?" he asked. "I haven't decided yet," she said. "Dad has good sandpaper," Danny told her seriously. And the really good kind of batteries. Not the cheap ones. Brendan watched Claudine's expression shift, in a way she probably didn't mean to show. Something loosened around her eyes. She came back the next day. And the day after that. The third time she came in, Brendan said, without looking up from the order he was processing. You don't have to keep finding reasons. She set her leather folder on the counter. I know. Neither of them said anything for a moment. My grandfather's letter was longer than I told you, she said finally. It wasn't just about doing something for the store, he said. She stopped, started again. He said I had spent 15 years building things and hadn't once stopped to ask myself what any of it was for. He said if I met Brendan Holt, I might start to understand. Brendan looked at her then. That's a lot to put on a stranger, he said. I know that too. He thought about it. Your grandfather sounds like he was a difficult man to argue with. He was impossible, she said. And for the first time she smiled properly, and it changed her whole face, and Brendan looked away at the register because something about it felt too direct. He did not think about it afterward. Or he told himself he didn't. The weeks that followed settled into a pattern neither of them named. Claudine was staying at the B&B on Linden Road, ostensibly reviewing the region's small business landscape for a community investment initiative her firm was exploring. She stopped by Holt & Sons most days. Sometimes she bought things. A set of hinges, a caulking gun, items Brendan suspected she had no use for. Sometimes she just leaned against the counter and talked. Which was not something people in Dunmore did much of during business hours, and which Brendan found he did not actually mind. She was not easy. She had opinions and she stated them without apology. She told him his pricing model was inconsistent and his window display looked like it hadn't been touched since 2009. He told her she was right on both counts. And changed neither thing immediately. Because he was tired and because he needed to make those changes on his own timeline. Not because someone with a leather folder had pointed at them. She accepted that without argument, which surprised him. She had grown up partly in Montreal and partly in Toronto, where her mother's family was from. Her parents had divorced when she was 12. She had put herself through university, built her company from a 2-person office to 40 employees, and had been engaged once to a man she described only as very suitable. Which turned out to be the whole problem. She said it lightly, but there was something careful underneath it. The way you speak carefully about a thing that still has edges. Danny decided he liked her the way children decide things. Completely and without discussion. He showed her his rock collection. He asked her whether she thought dinosaurs were better than sharks. He told her in complete seriousness that his dad made the best grilled cheese in Nova Scotia, and that she should try it before she left, because otherwise she would regret it her whole life. Claudine looked at Brendan over Danny's head. Brendan rubbed the back of his neck. He's not wrong about the grilled cheese. She came for dinner on a Friday. And then the following Friday without anyone formally suggesting it. She brought wine the first time, and good bread from the bakery in Truro the second time. And she sat at the kitchen table, while Brendan cooked and talked with Danny about sharks, and eventually dinosaurs, and then, inevitably, the specific and passionate subject of which, Lego sets were superior, and why. After Danny was in bed, Brendan and Claudine sat at the table with the last of the wine and Brendan said, "You're going to have to go back eventually." "I know," she said. "Your company's in Montreal. I know that too." He turned his glass slowly. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's happening here. I'm just not sure what to do with it." Claudine was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something honestly? Please. I've been running toward things my whole life," she said. "Bigger project, next acquisition, better quarter. My grandfather used to say I was always arriving somewhere and never actually there. I thought he was being sentimental." She looked at the kitchen. The corkboard with Danny's drawings. The chipped mug on the drying rack. The window looking out onto the dark, quiet street. "I don't think he was being sentimental." Brendan didn't say anything. "Sometimes silence is the most respectful thing. I'm not saying I have answers," she said. "I'm saying your grandfather was right about me needing to stop and look at something real for a while. He wasn't my grandfather, he was yours." "I know." She smiled. "But he sent me to you so." November came in hard that year, which anyone from Nova Scotia will tell you is simply what November does. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday. Brendan opened it at the counter before the store opened, in the gray early light with his coffee. Because there is something about that hour that he has always felt belongs only to him. It was from the property management company that held the building. The owner, who had let Holt & Sons operate there for 30 years under an arrangement made with Brendan's father, had died. His estate was liquidating. The building would go to market in the spring. Current tenants were welcome to submit an offer. Brendan set the letter down. He already knew what the offer would come in around. He had a vague enough sense of what the building was worth. He had absolutely no path to that number. He did not call Claudine. He served customers that day the way he always served customers. He was present, he was helpful, he knew where everything was, and he did not say anything about it to anyone. When Danny came in at 4, Brendan handed him the granola bar and asked about his day, and listened to a detailed account of a disagreement about hockey cards that had apparently shaken the entire 3rd grade to its foundation. That night after Danny was asleep, Brendan sat at the kitchen table with the letter and a pad of paper and did the math in the way you do when you already know what the math is going to say. Claudine came by the next morning. She could read him, which was something he had noticed and was still deciding how to feel about. She looked at his face and said, "What happened?" He showed her the letter. She read it twice. Then she set it down very carefully, the way you set things down when you're controlling something in yourself. "I can help with this," she said. "No, Brendan, no." He said it gently but completely. "I appreciate it, genuinely. But if I lose this place, I need to have lost it on my own terms, not have someone buy it for me. That's not the store anymore. That's a gift with my name on the door." He looked at the letter. "My dad built this. I'm not going to hold on to it that way." Claudine sat with that for a long moment. She didn't argue. That was one of the things about her. She understood the difference between a position that could be moved and one that couldn't. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I'm not going to fight you on this." She folded her hands on the table. "But I need you to know there are other ways, things that aren't a gift." He waited. Over the following weeks, Claudine did something that Brendan only fully understood later. She didn't write a check, she made phone calls. She knew people in the provincial small business office. She knew developers who were looking for mixed-use projects. In underserved communities, she knew someone at the Heritage Trust, who had been looking for a reason to flag certain buildings in Dunmore for protected status. None of it was fast. None of it was simple. And none of it removed Brendan from the equation. It just changed the equation. By December, 3 other business owners on the main street had joined a cooperative property bid. Something Brendan had never heard of being done in Dunmore before. The numbers were still hard, but they were possible. He worked 2 nights a week doing inventory for Ray Costello's auto parts business to build his share. He renegotiated his supplier contracts. He put the online store up, properly this time, with actual photos and real inventory. And by Christmas he had filled 11 orders that had never come through before, because no one outside of Dunmore had known the store existed. He did it himself. That mattered to him in a way he couldn't entirely explain and didn't try to. On Christmas Eve, the main street of Dunmore had the small particular glow that small towns manage in December. The kind of light that looks like it belongs to an earlier time, even when you're standing in it. There was a community dinner at the Legion Hall. The kind of event Brendan usually skipped because he was tired, and because showing up alone with a child can feel, on certain evenings, like something you're not ready to carry in public. He went this year. Danny ran ahead to find his school friends the moment they were inside. Brendan stood near the door with a coffee, and watched people he'd known his whole life move through a room strung with lights that had seen better decades, and he felt something that took him a minute to identify. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter. Something that had to do with still being here. Claudine came in behind him. She was in town, she'd said, because she had taken 3 days off, actually off, phone in the glove box, folder at the B&B. And she had not done that in so long she was going to need a minute to remember how. She stopped beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "My grandfather used to say the problem with people who are good at running companies," she said quietly, "is they forget how to stand still." "Did he tell you to come to Dunmore to learn how to stand still?" "He told me to come to Dunmore to see what I was missing." She looked at the room. "I think they're the same thing." Danny appeared out of nowhere and pulled Claudine by the hand toward his table, which was already catastrophically loud with 3rd graders. And she went without hesitation, laughing, which was a thing she did more easily now. And Brendan watched and felt that quiet thing again, the one without a clean name. Later they walked back along the main street in the cold. Danny was between them, holding Claudine's hand on one side and Brendan's on the other, swinging slightly the way kids do when they're happy, and don't bother to hide it. "Are you coming back in January?" Danny asked her. Claudine looked at Brendan over the boy's head. Brendan looked at the store as they passed it. The sign, the lit window, the trim he had finally finished painting, which looked better than it had in years. "Yeah," he said quietly, answering for both of them. She was. And the year that followed was not uncomplicated. Nothing real ever is. Claudine's firm opened a small satellite office in Truro, which she described as a business decision, and which everyone in Dunmore understood to be something more than that. The cooperative bid went through in March. Brendan signed the papers at the lawyer's office, with Ray Costello and 2 other business owners, and felt something lift off his shoulders that he hadn't had a name for until it was gone. He still got up before most mornings, but he started coming back to bed sometimes, lying in the early quiet, not counting things, just listening to the radiator, the house, the particular sound of a life that had found its way back to itself. Danny, by the spring, had started calling Claudine by her first name without the formality he'd started with. He had also started calling her, once, accidentally, and then twice more on purpose. Something that was not quite a title and not quite a name, something halfway between. Brendan didn't correct him. Some things you let find their own word. What Brendan understood eventually was that his grandfather's letter, Claudine's grandfather's letter, had not sent her to Dunmore to fix anything. It had sent her there to see something. And Brendan had not needed saving. He had needed what most people need and almost never say out loud. To be seen, fully, in the middle of an ordinary life, and to have someone decide that was exactly where they wanted to be. The store is still called Holt & Sons. He never repainted the sign, but, sometimes, on weekend mornings when the town is quiet and the light comes through the front window at the angle it only manages in spring, Claudine stands behind the counter with her coffee, and asks a customer if she can help them find something, and she does find it, because Brendan has taught her where everything is. And the customer leaves satisfied. And she turns back and catches Brendan watching her, and she raises one eyebrow the way she does. And Brendan goes back to what he was doing, smiling, without saying a word. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need to be lived.